Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Hadley Gamble, CNN, and her panel.
سيداتي سادتي، فلنرحب بهادلي جامبل من CNN وبلجنة الخبراء.
Good morning once again, everybody. Just a quick correction. Hadley Gamble with CNBC News. I'm the anchor and Middle East correspondent for the channel in the region, and I would like to invite our panelists to join me now on stage. We're going to be talking about the link between profit and purpose. Gentlemen, please.
Good morning again. Let me just interrupt Hadley's session with two quick announcements. I am really pleased, as an evidence of the Ministry of Finance commitment and the financial sector at large to develop our capital market, and particularly the debt capital market, that we are closing today, for the first time in the history of Saudi Arabia, the issuance of 30 years paper by the Debt Management Office of the Ministry of Finance. We will allocate north of 9 billion Saudi riyal to meet the demand for the 30 years paper, which is an evidence of the confidence the local investors have on the Saudi economy. The second announcement I would like to make is the Council of Ministers this week have announced, have approved a new license, banking license, which is going to be issued to Credit Suisse. Again, when we see international banks closing branches in certain countries and consolidating, this is the second license that we issued for foreign banks in the past 5 weeks. So I'm also glad to see that happening. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, thank you so much for joining us. I want to kick off, since we have a limited amount of time, by following on to what we just heard from His Excellency Mohammed Al-Jadaan, the Finance Minister, what you've suggested in terms of what's going to happen next for the private sector inside Saudi Arabia. One of the big questions, of course, is whether or not the enthusiasm that we saw for these Aramco bonds is translating into enthusiasm for investing inside the kingdom, because confidence in a company doesn't necessarily mean confidence in a country. What is the strategy for getting big investors like Mr. Larry Fink to put money to work inside Saudi Arabia?
Thank you very much. I think we have a very strong story to tell. And I hope Larry and his colleagues, the asset managers and investors would see through, and this is really one way today in this conference to show the opportunities that this country, but also the region, and we have my colleagues from Kuwait and Bahrain, just to show that actually it is not only Saudi Arabia, the whole region is going through significant reform. Commitment from governments to be more aligned, to cooperate with the private sector, to facilitate the private sector investments, to ensure that the private sector feels safe with their investment, and provide a very long-term sustainable investment opportunities. We have a young demography in the region who are aspiring to a better life. We have governments who are very determined to reform and to put their money where their mouth is and invest significantly in infrastructure, services, and technology for the years to come, and that provides significant opportunities for the private sector. I think what we need is private sector who are looking for long-term sustainable growth, and the growth is here, the growth in Saudi Arabia, the growth in the GCC.
I want to move on to Larry now, if you want to respond to His Excellency, in the sense that you've been working inside this region for a very long time now. You have significant relationships in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait as well, other Gulf countries, the UAE, for example. What's it going to take to get BlackRock to put money to work in Saudi Arabia?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Excellencies. It's great to be on the panel with you. We were a substantial investor in the Saudi Aramco bond issue. We see very large opportunities in the entire region. And we do believe, like the transaction we did with ADNOC in the Emirates is a very good example of unlocking huge assets and huge opportunities and then translating those huge unlocked assets into different sources of investments. But I think if you link what we're here to talk about in the prior conversation about capital markets, for global investors to enter any markets and to be substantial in any market, there has to be not just a capital markets that is substantial, but a capital markets that has domestic participation. And it is a combination of domestic participation plus international investors makes that robust capital markets. There's a great need in the region to build a strong retirement market. Retirement is the best long-term investment. It also helps more and more of the populations in the region. Earlier in the prior sessions, the oil minister talked about technology and how technology is changing everything. Well, technology is also changing many jobs. And one thing that is going to be critical is for more inclusion. And the only way to get more financial inclusion in this region and every region is to have greater participation in the capital markets through equities in their retirement plans. And so I think it's essential to think about the transformation of the region is a combination of a strong bottom-up development of a retirement market that is a long-term investing, dovetailing that with huge international investing, and that is the whole foundation and ingredients to build a substantial capital markets. And once the combination of both domestic long-term savings plus international investing really creates the dynamism for all forms of investing, and it really then creates more financial inclusion with more participants. And I think that's going to be very critical for the region. The region should not make the mistakes that so many other regions, like in Europe, where there's such shallow participation by locals in investing in their own capital markets. And I think that's going to be one of the critical characteristics to build. And BlackRock will play a big role in that, in both working with the domestic savers and building their retirement, plus bringing in international investing to invest side by side.
A huge opportunity there, and also there's a huge opportunity, of course, we'll be speaking a lot about that later today in terms of the insurance sector as well. I wanted Mr. Al-Jadjan to talk about that a little bit in terms of what Saudi Arabia is doing in terms of enforcing current regulations there, because that's a major opportunity, isn't it?
Indeed it is. I think the Financial Sector Development Program focuses on 4 pillars. One of them is saving schemes. We in Saudi Arabia have very limited saving products historically, and that is now changing. We have a dedicated initiatives that aims to work on financial literacy, awareness on saving and saving importance. We have specific programs to work with financial institutions to actually encourage more products to be developed. I think some will be announced during this conference. The government is taking steps also to ensure that the availability of products, and we are announcing some. I do want to steal the thunder from my colleagues. We are announcing few also initiatives in this direction, but it is actually very, very important, and we are on the insurance side working very closely with the regulator, the central bank, to ensure more consolidation, stronger insurance companies, and more market for it.
So stronger insurance sector, certainly in terms of investing in your own capital markets as well for the longer term. I want to bring in now His Excellency Dr. Naif Al-Hashraf, the Kuwaiti Finance Minister, and ask you a little bit about the question of security. Because obviously we've seen, and Kuwait has been caught in the crosshairs of regional conflict before. That certainly kept the country from really reinvesting in itself for a long time. That's changed today. You're making great strides in terms of what you're doing to diversify Kuwait's economy. But at the same point, you're trying to convince international investors, foreign direct investors, that it's safe to put their money, not just in Kuwait, but also in the broader region. And we're talking about investment at a time when the rhetoric between the United States and Tehran obviously is much heightened than what we've seen in the past. And also at a time, frankly, where internal security, and for example, in Saudi Arabia, is questionable. How do you do it?
Well, thank you, Heidli, and good to be here today among this audience. And I think you've just raised very good questions. And when I'm referring to Kuwait, I'm just making an example, but I think it's applicable in general for the whole GCC region. And everyone knows that security is very, very important, and we will never be able to have an economic growth if there is no security in place. I'm sure that everyone agrees that what we've been seeing over the last few years is the GCC economy and the collaborations between international communities as well have shown a great interest to stabilize the region for so many reasons. Not only for the oil production that's coming from this part of the world to the rest of the world. So this interest is combined with a great understanding of these challenges in both economic aspects as well as security aspects. And we are part of this world, and previously it was said, if the Wall Street sneezes, everyone catch a cold. And I think nowadays, if anyone sneezes, everyone catch a cold, because markets are become very interconnected, investors are become very sophisticated, and technology making it very easy to access any market. So we cannot isolate the economic aspects from securities, in which the international communities have shown, and we actually responding to that interest, that stabilizing the region is leading to stabilizing the world in general. All the challenges, whether it is security issues, whether it's economic issues, or any other issues, won't be solved in isolations. We have to look into the full pictures and in collaborations with everyone. And I think facing the challenge alone is not advisable anymore, but we have to think collectively to understand the nature of the challenge and to make sure that we are addressing these challenges in the right manner at the right time and with everyone's contributions to the solution.
We're talking about a holistic approach there. Larry, I want to bring you in here. Is President Trump getting it right when it comes to the security of this region? Because we've heard a heck of a lot of rhetoric coming out of Washington of late, and certainly a lot of fears, frankly, about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. We heard from Howard Al-Fala, His Excellency, the Energy Minister, essentially saying, we're not going to leave our customers out to dry here. But is Washington really getting it right when it comes to the policy with regards to security? Because that has a direct impact on the ability of these economies to grow and thrive.
Well, you probably pay more attention to it than I do as a reporter. I think security in the region is getting more secure, and I think this is one of the foundational reasons why investors have become more interested in the region. Related to the sanctions related to Iran, they produce about 4 million barrels of oil a day, approximately, of which 2 million barrels are used for domestic purposes. So the delta is much smaller than people think. And as the oil minister suggested, there's great inventory. So if there's a time to be moving forward on trying to make the region even more secure, it looks like this is probably a very good time to do that. I think this is also dovetailing probably in association with moving much closer to the trade agreement with China. So I think this is all being orchestrated. I don't have enough information to know whether it's right or wrong, but it looks like an opportune time to try this out.
It's interesting because Mr. Alfala is headed off to the Belt and Road Initiative. I think a lot of people in this room are headed to China very shortly. And you see so many opportunities in China, even though the growth isn't there in the immediate term.
China has done a fantastic job of stabilizing its economy through fiscal policy. The Chinese leadership have done a very good job at long-term planning. We have steadfastly remained to be constructive on China, despite all the market fears. And I do believe the marketplaces, the global capital markets are in good shape. I would say, as I said on CNBC last week, the greatest risk we have in the world today is a melt-up in equities, not a meltdown. Global investors worldwide are underinvested, and they're looking for opportunities. And I do believe that will continue on. And I think investors are looking not just for new opportunities, they're looking to place money in different regions to diversify their portfolio. So what we see from worldwide investors are, where can we find opportunities, not pulling out of the marketplace. And I think the fourth quarter was a growth scare, whether it was a growth scare in China, growth scare in the United States and in Europe, but we're seeing a stabilization. Once again, I spend so much time talking about long-termism. If you just went on holiday on September 1st and came back like April 1st, markets were fine. Nothing happened, and you would have been more relaxed and happier. So I know it sells a lot of television advertisement, all the volatility, but the reality is it's all noise. People need to focus on long-term opportunities like investing in this region, long-term opportunities to be finding things, and if we spend less time focusing on the ups and downs of marketplaces, we'll be healthier for it.
Talking about that kind of long-term investment, when we speak about Bahrain, Sheikh Salman, I want to bring you in here and talking in terms of that ecosystem. You've depended in large part on your Gulf neighbors often in the past as Bahrain in terms of reaching some kind of economic stability, but what's the long-term strategy here?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Your Excellency. And it's always a great pleasure to be in Riyadh and see the many young faces that are building the country and taking it forward, and are the future and the real investment opportunity for the region. The Kingdom of Bahrain, over the past few years, has faced many challenges with regards to ensuring that we are on a sustainable and positive trajectory with the support and coordination of our partners and neighbors in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the State of Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. We put together what was the first multilateral financing package done in the region that was tied to a credible and robust medium-term plan to get Bahrain's fiscal position on a sustainable path. That touches on many factors that are important and on something that Larry mentioned earlier, which is that it's important to have a depth of capital markets, but this was also an important signal as to a multilateral financing done for a country in the region, by the countries in the region, with a multilateral agency based in the region, which was the Arab Monetary Fund, and as part of that development of depth that is needed and required. What is the main medium-term goal that we need to look at in Bahrain? When we're looking at the fiscal position and economic growth and balancing between the two and ensuring that we're on the right footing for the two, it is important to note that oil in GDP or oil in fiscal revenues can sometimes be a distorting factor. And so one of the main policy items that we had to contend with was to, in effect, remove that distortion and focus on numbers and targets that were non-oil, whether we're looking at non-oil revenue and how much it covers of recurrent revenue, or whether it is non-oil GDP and how that translates into non-oil revenue. And that starts to give us a much better picture of the real sustainability. And with the fiscal balance plan, that's what we tried to do. And now, having had the support and the fiscal balance plan announced and the fiscal balance support package announced as well, we are well on our way to executing. And the Kingdom of Bahrain has managed to, from the 2015 deficit numbers, have budget numbers for this year that are 62%, a 62% reduction in the deficit. And that is the right signal in terms of where we are moving, while maintaining economic growth and job creation.
I want to bring in Dr. Nayef as well in terms of the diversification of Kuwait's economy. When we talk about what happens next in terms of you've got the 5th largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, how much are you putting back into your own country of that money? Because we've seen so much of it over the years going somewhere else to get returns. And another question I would add on to that is the situation for women. You've been very progressive in terms of your UN Global Compact and sort of the survey that really is going to give us a much clearer picture about the opportunities for women, not just in Kuwait, but in the larger Middle East. What's your take on that? Because certainly if you aren't playing to at least half your demographic, there's no way you're going to get it right.
Not the case anymore, I think. And well, I'll go for the second questions before I go back to the Sovereign Wealth Fund. I think we are living in history nowadays because there's a whole new chapter of a new history is being written right now. And if you look at all the reforms taking place everywhere, this is something is reflecting what is a dynamic region, dynamic societies we are. If I'm speaking about Kuwait, then everyone knows that women is participating in every single aspect of public as well as private. Some big companies actually managed by a female person. There is women who are serving in the ministry as well as elected for the National Assembly, our parliament in Kuwait. So this is not a question anymore in 2019, and I'm very happy that across the whole we see so many female who is contributing to the society in different aspects, not only from the economic point of view, but now in all different aspects of life. You can see the women contributing side by side with the men, and this is what the future requires, and we want to make sure that no one left behind. Regarding to the KIA, everyone knows that Kuwait has established the first ever sovereign wealth fund back in 1952. And it was a vision by the late Emir of Kuwait at that time, who saw the opportunities that, and the challenge as well, to deduct 10% of the annual revenue from oil and non-oil and contributed to the Future Generation Fund, which then became the Kuwait Investments Authority. And the law actually indicating that all the return from the invested money will go back to the same fund. This is the money that we are keeping aside for the future generations when the revenue coming from the oil won't be enough to support the living standards or the budget requirements, as well as it is playing a significant role in diversifying the economy away from the oil. I mean, the KIA is working actively with the private sectors to create a momentum that will lead to better and bigger role for the private sectors in the economy. At the same time, the government is zooming out from operation and maintaining its regulator as well as supervising all the different aspects to maintain there is a fairness and jurisdiction system in a place to protect everyone's right.
One of the concerns that we hear, not just from policymakers and potential investors, but also those in the sort of global financial sphere as well, is that with higher oil prices, there will be a slowdown of the reform process, particularly in Saudi Arabia. Your Excellency, can you assure those investors that when it comes to reforms, they're not going to be putting the brakes on?
This is, I think, very, very important point, and I could make it a very short answer. We are committed to the reform. This is not about the price of oil. This is about economy that needs to be diversified. We are committed. We have very specific deliverables every year, every quarter that is measured. And if we have a higher oil price, I will be happier. I will have stronger reserves, and that will just provide us more cushion for the down cycle. But reform is continuing, and we are determined to make sure that we deliver on time with the targets.
And in terms of that security, I want to ask you about that as well, because that's a major concern for private investors. We've seen a knockoff in private investment over the last couple of years from inside the GCC, particularly inside Saudi Arabia. There have been a lot of fears about the direction of the country, and that's reflected, I have to say, in international news media, for example, and that certainly doesn't help the investment case for international investors. How do you address that concern? Because it seems as if every time we have a financial conference or coming up on one, we have another national security issue in Saudi Arabia. How do you address that head on?
Few things. I think one, the whole reform in Saudi Arabia and in the GCC is bringing a lot of hope. To the reverse, I think what we are doing is sending the right signal to the region, particularly to countries with a lot of trouble in the region, that if you diversify, if you reform, if you have the right governance, if you really focus on reforming your economy, it will bring hope, it will bring prosperity to your people. And it is actually bringing a lot of hope. We are talking to Iraq, we are talking to extensively to the Yemeni people and others in the region to make sure that we bring stability. Second, in relation to security, I think it has been proven very well in Saudi Arabia and in the GCC that it is one of the safest worldwide. The fact that we have one terrorist incident in one place in Saudi, it is just like having a terrorist incident anywhere in Europe and in the United States or elsewhere. These incidents will happen. We are working with the world to make sure that we combat the financing of terrorism and exchange security information. We work very closely with the West and the regional forces to make sure that we intercept and fight terrorism and bring security. But if you look at what is happening in the GCC, actually it is a very secure region. I think to a large extent, people will need to let go part of what they see in the media and come and see for themselves. I mean, investors who are actually familiar with the region are investing in the region. As I said earlier, last year we have seen 98% growth on FDI. The first quarter of 2019, we have seen 28% growth of FDI. So investors who are visiting, who come and see, they actually feel comfortable investing, they feel comfortable with the environment, with the regulatory environment, with the government commitment of the reform, and the security of the region.
Larry, weigh in here. Is Saudi Arabia and the wider GCC a victim of the news media, or are there real concerns for investors?
Well, I like to blame the news media on most things. So I look at it as a long-term investor over a long period of time. The transformation of the region has been quite amazing. And I think if you just look at a point in time, the Saudi Aramco bond issue, not just the demand, but this credit spread off U.S. Treasuries, it's trading around 103 basis points off. It was a big tightening from the original price talk. It is a great reflection on the kingdom, but also on the region and the opportunities. So, the region is not perfect. There's no region in the world that's perfect. There are issues that need to be addressed, and I think the power of the press plays a good role in addressing the issues. But the power of the press also allows issues to be mitigated. And in most cases for long-term investing, most issues that are being addressed in the media are mitigated, and that's why long-termism and why long-term optimism is generally the right strategy for most investing over a long horizon. So I would argue the media is responsible for much of the noise, but the noise is actually a good process in which positive mitigation occurs. If it wasn't for the media, some of the issues would not have been addressed here in the region or in any other part of the world today. So I look at this as a real positive. But the fact that there's issues in the press does not tell me I must run away from a place. In many cases, it tells me I should run to and invest, because what we're most frightened of are things that we don't talk about. What we're most frightened of, and when we have financial crises, are things that we are not being realistic and we're in denial of. And that was a great example of the financial crisis, of the severity of the debt and all the pockets where money was being, secretly held. That is not the case. I mean, from all my years coming to the region, I see much more transparency. I see a willingness by governments to move forward. I see governments in the region focusing on how to improve financial inclusion, how to increase more social inclusion. I mean, the changes here in the kingdom itself in the last 2 years are pretty amazing. Should it stop here? No, but it's a process of improvement. To me, that's what you're looking for as a long-term investor. And so as I look at this as great opportunities. Actually, we wanted the Saudi Aramco bond issue to be much wider, so we had higher return to our investors. We ended up buying it anyway at a much tighter spread, but that was a great example of the moment. And I do believe as the region continues to be focused on much greater inclusion, the region will benefit. As the region focuses on the development of its capital markets, building small and medium businesses and opportunities for more private sector jobs for more, capital is going to come into the region. And these are all good long-term processes to build long-term stability.
Where are you going to put your capital, though, other than those Aramco bonds, in terms of putting money to work inside Saudi Arabia?
We are. I mean, it was very visible what we did in Abu Dhabi and the ADNOC transaction. We are looking at transactions here in the kingdom and other parts of the GCC right now. So
could we see another ADNOC type deal here inside Saudi Arabia?
We're looking at many different opportunities as an investor, and we're very pleased of working with the region in terms of helping them diversify their portfolios outside the region.
Your Excellency, Mr. Al-Jadjan, we just have a couple of minutes left, and I have to tell you, let me get the number right, because I was quite concerned to do that. Of the 125 speakers at this event, 14 of them are women, including me. What is the strategy, before I let you go, to include more women, particularly in the financial services sector? Because we're here, and it's certainly important to include us in this process.
First of all, I'm really glad that we have this number of speakers, and I'm happy to see this number of female speakers participating. I think in Saudi, we started late, but we are catching up. In some of the government institutions, the central bank, for example, only a few years back, female participation was 0. Now they are 15% of the workforce and growing in a very short space of time. We are empowering women. We are actually looking at that very seriously. The growth of women employment in Saudi Arabia is actually double the male employment, because we are starting from a low base. So we are taking this very seriously. We wanted to encourage them, and hopefully we will see more participation in the years to come, not only in this conference, but actually in the workplace, allowing them to get financing, allowing them to start their own businesses. That is shared around the region, but in Saudi, we started late and we are catching up, and we are seeing the benefit. It's just a fantastic experience to see the value, the added value that female participants in the workplace add in terms of dedication and loyalty.
Your Excellency, the Finance Minister from Bahrain, walk me through the strategy here in terms of encouraging private sector investment inside your country, because we've seen that fallen off with the lower oil prices. Oil prices have picked up. Does that mean confidence suddenly returns to the private sector and we get going again?
Well, I think one of the important things to note is how big of a role the private sector plays in Bahrain's economy. So, just as an example, today, more than 60% of Bahrainis are actually employed by the private sector, and that number is increasing. As the government transforms its role in different sectors from being an operator to being a regulator, it really starts depending more on capital deployment by the private sector. One of the important sectors, of course, is the financial sector. In Bahrain today, the financial sector is the largest non-oil sector we have at over 16% of GDP. But the financial sector is not just a sector that we need to grow in Bahrain and in other countries in the region to drive employment or to drive opportunities or to drive participation. The growth of the financial sector is also important because it is the one that is redeploying capital from people with excess capital in the economy, or economic players with excess capital, to economic players with capital needs. And whether we've always had a larger banking sector provide the capital needs. And over the past few decades, the region as a whole has had significant development of capital markets, has had significant development of asset management, and other capital redeployment mechanisms. But we need to continue on that front, and therefore introducing the right legislation and opening up to foreign investment and ensuring that we have the right oversight becomes very important to ensure that we have the right internal capital redeployment mechanisms to ensure sustainable growth.
And Larry, I want to give you the final word here. When are we going to see a BlackRock office opened in Saudi Arabia?
We're working on it. It's going to happen.
Excellent. Gentlemen, Your Excellencies, Larry, thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to wrap it up.
Thank you.